Western governments more and more absolutely need war. Why is that? When you see the surging deficits, not only in the United States, but Italy, Spain, the UK, Germany, even when Germany is spending itself into a hole, you know there's a problem there, right? Well, all these Western governments are becoming more and more indebted. Japan is becoming a black hole that's sucking in the world economy. The only thing that they believe can save us is, you guessed it, World War III. Because that will justify all the spending, right? And you can have all that spending if there's a war, right? And then you can force people to take the money. You can force people to take the money and to accept the inflation and to take it right on the chin because there's no room for political dissent in a major war. This is when the parties come together and they all agree that we're not going to criticize the leadership, and the leadership can just basically act like a dictator in order to win the war. They think that we need war in order to survive the coming inflationary and economic storm that is coming. And that is truly horrific. We see the United States and its allies pushing for war harder and harder. And the fact that we see the Brics countries don't seem to be trying to give us that war is just kind of pretty telling, isn't it? Well, we got to talk about a lot of stuff here because one of the things that's most interesting is that we're not even pushing for victory. We just need the conflict itself. And it's not just in the military World War III conflict that's coming, but it's in all the little conflicts right now. It's more about having these continual crises so that we can justify the emergency spending that's happening around the world. It's crazy, friends. Well, welcome to the Poplar Report. We talk about things here on this channel that you won't hear about in the mainstream media. You may hear a passing reference, but they won't touch these things. They won't talk to you about birth rates declining in the West. They won't talk about how we're losing to Russia, how we're losing to China, how everything is going to pot here in the United States. And it's not just who's in Washington, D.C., but it's the fact that all these deep staters, the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C., are so corrupt that even the politicians at the top don't necessarily matter unless they can clean house. We saw that back during the Trump years. He started turning some things around, but there were so many people sabotaging him that it was almost like he wasn't in charge of the government. All right, so let's jump into here. So this was an interesting exchange that happened over the last couple weeks. We saw Biden went over to the G7 and he's like, yeah, let's all confiscate $500 million of the Russians and we'll use it to rebuild Ukraine. Which I told you back then that's an act of war. Like, you can't just take other countries' stuff. Like, that's an act of war. We didn't do it to North Korea, who we actually are still at war with. We didn't do it to Cuba. We didn't do it to Iran. Remember, we froze Iran's assets, their offshore assets. And then President Obama took the $7 billion and gave it to them in pallets of U.S. dollars. Like, literally got pallets of U.S. dollars, $100 bills, and gave them physically to Iran because it's their money. I mean, I know they're really bad people, and I know that their government is evil and corrupt, and, you know, they want to nuke Israel and stuff like that. But, I mean, we wouldn't take their money if we're not at war with them. That'd be insane. So here we are with Russia with over 5,000 nukes, and President Biden's like, hey, let's take their money. No problem there, apparently. We wouldn't do it to our worst of enemies in peacetime, but of course to Russia we can do that. And the crazy thing was the United States did it, but most of the money was sitting over in Italy and in Germany. And so we had to get our allies to stand up to Russia. So Biden went over there, mumbled some stuff, and basically got the actual people running the U.S. government, got in contact with their people over there, and convinced them somehow that this would be a good idea. Let's take their $500 million. So what does Russia do? Turns around and takes $800 million euro from several banks, Deutsche Bank, Commerzbank, and UniCredit. Goes after mostly Germany and takes 800 million euros from them. Now, I don't know exactly what the exchange rate is right now. The euro has been dropping against the dollar for a while, but euro is still worth a little bit more than a dollar. So we take $500 million of theirs, and they take 800 million euros of ours. This is the type of conflict we've been engaging in since like Vietnam. Like, we always are the suckers who end up holding the bag, right? Our leaders they can't play checkers, it seems like. I mean, the only competent person that we've had in the last several decades, arguably Bill Clinton was a little bit clever, but Donald Trump's the only one who's actually tried to get us our fair share on the world stage. I mean, George W. Bush, he just handed out things to everyone and just gave away the whole house to everybody, and the Democrats have just been all about that too. We've just been stepped on from every direction. I mean, you've heard of the incidents over in outside Yemen, where we have these multi-billion-dollar warships parked off their coast, firing $3 million missiles to knock down their $60,000 drones. And that's just, I'm sorry, friends, but even when we win, we lose. We won against the Taliban, and how many billions of dollars worth of equipment did we leave behind in our victory? I mean, Iraq, we built these military bases for them, and now those military bases are being occupied by Iranian militias. Iranian militias and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards are manning the bases we built. It's absolute insanity. Everywhere you look, we have been sold out. And it may seem like, well, it's just gross incompetence in Washington, D.C. Or maybe it's just random corruption, like they're not really trying to destroy us, but like they have other interests, like, 10% for the big guy and that type of stuff, right? Maybe they're just trying to get all the money on the side that they can. They're trying to take care of their military contractors and these big military industrial complex, because that's what goes into their campaign funds. But that's not quite even it, because what we see is our government and other Western governments are in collusion with each other to create conflict, because they realize that without conflict, we can't justify all this deficit spending. We can't justify spending so much money and losing so much money. The simple fact is, when you look at demographics, birth rates in the West compared to birth rates in the Brics countries, we're ahead wealth-wise, but the Brics countries are catching up. China is catching up to the U.S. GDP, okay? They're closing the gap. And if we don't do anything, they're going to surpass us. They have more Navy ships out there. We have bigger Navy ships. But the simple fact is, we're struggling to keep our Navy ships in the water while they're struggling to build Navy ships. In the next 10 years, they're going to build more Navy ships than we have, okay? That's how bad it is. It's ridiculous. Now, is the quality of their ships great? No, it's not. But here's the thing. They don't need to sail their Navy ships all the way around the world to go attack us. But the way we've set up the world, we have to sail our Navy ships halfway around the world to get to where the conflict is, which makes you kind of wonder who's the aggressor here, right? I mean, the fact that we have to have our United States Coast Guard patrolling off the Chinese coast makes you wonder if that's exactly what the founders meant when they formed the Coast Guard. I know it doesn't specify in the name which coast is being patrolled and which coast is being guarded, but the fact that we're guarding our enemies' coasts with our Coast Guard Just kind of shows how absurd and stupid the whole Defense Department is. The Defense Department that doesn't defend the United States just goes out and attacks people. We preemptively defend other countries from themselves and to promote democracy and all that kind of good stuff out there. But we need the conflict. Why? Because the globalists and the powers that be, they see the rising of the Brics countries and they say, we're ahead right now, but they're catching up. So we need to have a military conflict with them now to prolong our dominance. And maybe it will win. Maybe it won't. But they don't even really care about winning. What matters is conflict, because it gives the Federal Reserve excuses to lower interest rates and to start doing all this emergency stuff. They need some kind of crisis. They need some kind of thing, because they're not telling us how bad the economy is. I mean, how could they? It's an election year. They can't go out there and tell us the truth. They can't tell us about 50% of the illegal aliens inside the United States are unemployed. Wait a minute. If they're unemployed, how are they eating? How are they paying for their housing? I wonder how all the illegal aliens are affording things if 50% of them are unemployed. Well, it's pretty simple, because the government's paying for everything. But they need more young people into the country. We all look at the border and go, why are all these military-age males coming into the U.S.? And those guys are going, good, cannon fodder for World War III. More people to push into the engines of industry and make the GDP of the United States go up. See, when the federal government pays for their housing, pays for their food by giving them food stamp cards, gives them cash, gives them all this stuff, this adds to the GDP. They borrow the money from themselves. It's called printing money, right? They borrow money from themselves, and then they give it to these people who spend it for them, and that adds to the GDP of the United States, which gets the Democrat reelected. Yeah, it's all one big Ponzi scheme, but at the end of the Ponzi scheme, you start doing these absurd things to keep the Ponzi scheme going just a little bit longer, right? You need just a little bit more. You need the base to keep growing faster than the Ponzi scheme that's collapsing behind it, right? It needs to keep growing or else it implodes. And we're at that point in our country, and not just the United States, but Europe's right there too, and we see the thing even further down in Japan, where we're producing more money than the goods that we're producing. Our number one export, the United States, the only thing keeping us afloat, is we're printing US dollars and we're selling them to suckers around the world. Our number one export is the US dollar. That's why people keep talking about de-dollarization. Other countries going like, okay, so this is worthless paper, and we don't want any more of it. Instead, we'll take physical metals like silver, gold. We want our gold back. We're seeing countries all over the world are repatriating their gold because they don't trust the United States with their gold. They're looking at our banks who are playing these games with precious metals, and they realize that there's 10 people who own a stock certificate saying that they own that 1 ounce of gold in the vault. And they know that there are 200 pieces of paper saying that people own per ounce of silver in the vault. 200 to 1. 200 people that if they all showed up at the bank at the same time and said, here's my piece of paper, now where's my ounce of gold, silver, sorry. 200 of them would show up. One would get the ounce of silver, which in reality none of them would, but you get the idea. It's one big Ponzi scheme, and these other countries around the world are like, you're using our gold to sell the promise of gold to other people. What happens when those people all show up at the bank and demand their gold. Are you going to give them our gold? Yeah, let's not do that. How about you give us our gold back? And that's what these countries are doing, right and left. They're just repatriating their gold. They're asking for it back to their country where they can actually look at it and make sure it's actually there. Because they're realizing that when the music stops, there aren't going to be enough chairs for everyone to sit down. And they're starting to realize that there's only a couple chairs and there's a whole heck of a lot of people. If you thought the 2008 banking crisis was bad, the fact is that we didn't let those banks fail. All we did was we propped them up and kicked the can down the road. All of that damage that was about to implode, we papered over that. All those problems are still there, and then they've made it so much worse. If you just think of it this way, what is the consumption of the United States? And what is the production of the United States? What do we actually make in the United States versus what do we actually consume? And when you think of it that way, you realize we're screwed. Because for a long time, we've been printing pieces of paper and sending them overseas, whether it's in pallets to go to Iran or whether it's wherever else. We've been giving them pieces of paper, and people keep thinking they're valuable. But when it comes down to the production of the United States, we produce far, far less than what we consume. And when you take the money out of the equation and just look at it straight from a value of what we produce versus what we consume, you realize that it's a major, major imbalance. And I understand there's services in there, but what I'm telling you is what makes the equation balance is the fact that the Federal Reserve prints US dollars and we ship them overseas to get all of the goods that we want. And that system is going to stop working pretty soon. How soon? Is it next week? Is it next year? I don't know, but it's slowing down right now. The de-dollarization, the abandonment of other countries using the SWIFT system, which uses dollars as lubricant, and it's the blood that goes through the banking system of the world. Country after country is cutting their links to the SWIFT system and changing over to the Chinese system, changing over to the Russian system, changing over to the other alternative systems that are coming out. Even some are moving over to things like Ethereum and moving over to Bitcoin. Things are changing, friends, and these people who think they're in control and think they are smarter than all the rest of us, they think that conflict is the only thing that's going to keep us afloat. And they will drag us right into World War III with a smile on their faces because they think that's the only way we're going to get through this safely. Our financial concerns are going to drive us into war. We could not stand the thought of Japan surpassing us back in the 1930s. And so we economically blockaded them. We cut off their access to oil and raw resources in order to try to starve their islands. What we didn't realize was that triggered them to start invading places to grab those resources. And it brought us into direct military confrontation with them. They were going to surpass us, and we didn't like that. And so we basically dragged ourselves into World War II. Now, we actually won that, but we're not going to win this next round. When you start putting these countries, the Brics countries together, depending on who lands on which teams, it's probably not going to go well for us. We think that we're invincible, but we're really, really not. They have already landed the equivalent of multiple armies here physically in the United States. How many of these people are going to be loyal to the United States when push comes to shove? When they're all sitting in their own little communities, speaking their own languages, what happens when we declare war on their country? Are they going to go burn our city to the ground? Are they going to go over and start taking out power transformers? I don't know what they're going to do, but they're going to talk about it in their own language, in what we don't understand, and they're going to make a decision themselves, and they might just decide to side with their home country over their red, white, and blue. Nobody wants to have that conversation, but there it is. There it is. All right, friends, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments down below. There's another video from this channel right up here if you want to check that out. I'll see you over there, or I'll see you guys later. Steve Poplar of the Poplar Report.